I believed myself to be the only one on the lake. Then a cry, something inhuman, reached my ears. I spun around so quickly I almost capsized the boat, my eyes sweeping the distant shoreline. Initially, I could see nothing unusual. There was only water, pine trees, and sunlight glinting on the surface as if all was right with the world. But then I noticed it. A dark form was flailing at the boundary where the reeds met the water. It was a small, sodden shape, struggling desperately before it sank from view. My heart seized. It was a German Shepherd puppy. I didn't hesitate. I acted. I kicked my boots off, tossed my fishing pole away, and plunged into the icy spring water. The cold struck me like 1,000 blades, stealing my breath and forcing panic deep into my chest. But it didn't matter. I swam with all my might, my gaze fixed on the place I had last seen him. Every moment was critical. He was so little, so distant, and the water was so cold. I made it to the reeds just as something grazed my arm. Reaching down blindly, I felt limp, soaked fur. For one dreadful instant, I was sure he was gone. Then, the faintest twitch coursed through his body. His paw moved once. He was still alive. I pulled him up against me and kicked my way back to my boat, cradling his drenched, seemingly lifeless form. His head rested limply on my shoulder, his eyes were shut. There was no sound or motion, just a delicate body that had no business being in that lake. By the time I managed to get him aboard, my own body was trembling so violently I could barely keep him steady. I bundled him in my jacket and yelled against the wind, "Stay with me. Don't you give up now." I started the engine and raced across the lake toward the dock. I had no strategy, only a dying German Shepherd puppy in my arms and a profound intuition that I could not allow this little creature to slip away. Not this day. Not after he had fought so hard just to be found. His chest was still. His body was as cold as a rock, but his mouth parted slightly, and I heard the softest, most broken whimper escape. He was still fighting. And so was I. I have no memory of parking my truck, only the screech of tires and the slam of the door as I rushed toward the Northwood Veterinary Clinic, the puppy still wrapped in my drenched jacket. My boots slapped against the tile floor, and I shouted before the door had even swung shut behind me. "Emergency! His breathing is wrong." The receptionist shot to her feet, and in moments a technician was running toward me. I was reluctant to let him go, his minuscule body barely stirring in my arms, but I placed him carefully on the examination table, and they began their work. It required 3 people, an oxygen mask, heated blankets, and an injection. One person applied gentle, rhythmic pressure to his ribs. Another cleared water from his mouth. And then I witnessed it. He coughed, a barely perceptible sound, but it was a sign. "German Shepherd puppy," the vet said under her breath while checking his heart. "Male, around 6 months old. Hypothermic, a near drowning, but there's a pulse." I remained frozen by the wall, dripping water from the lake, my hands clenched into fists. "Is he going to live?" The vet looked at me. She was composed, yet her eyes were grave. If you had found him 5 minutes later, this would be a very different conversation. My stomach plummeted. 5 minutes. That was the thin line between life and death. They transferred him to a warming unit, which was just a small, padded enclosure under heat lamps with an 4-line in his leg. He looked ghostly, limp and silent, but he was present, still with us. That was sufficient. "You can stay with him," the technician offered kindly. "It might help." I drew a chair close, leaned in, and rested my hand on his paw. He didn't move. His paw pads felt like ice. I swallowed with difficulty. "You put up a fight out there," I whispered. "Don't quit now. I've got you." Minutes crept by, which might have stretched into hours. I lost track of time. The room was unnervingly quiet and still. And then his paw twitched, a tiny, involuntary movement. But I felt it. His body shivered faintly, as if a minuscule flame was struggling to reignite from within. I blinked away moisture from my eyes, leaned nearer, and whispered once more, "Come on back, buddy. I'm right here." The technician checked on him and gave a nod. "He's stabilizing, but slowly. Whatever he's endured, he has a strong will to live." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The German Shepherd puppy was battling, still in a precarious state, still fragile, but he was no longer fading away. I didn't know his name, where he was from, or who had left him to perish in a freezing lake. But I was certain of one thing. He wasn't going back there. They allowed me to bring him home that evening with a single instruction. I was to keep him warm, fed, and undisturbed. No excitement, no loud noises, just patience and warmth. I prepared a spot beside the fireplace, spread out an old flannel blanket, and carefully set his sleeping body down on it. He didn't stir, only curling up instinctively as if he were still in another place, a place that was cold and lonely. The house felt different with his presence. I lived by myself and had ever since Sarah passed away 6 years ago. It was just me, the lake, and the quiet. I preferred it that way, or so I had convinced myself. But now, with this soaked puppy breathing faintly next to my boots, the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt vacant. I knelt next to him, gently patting his fur with a towel, taking care not to disturb him too much. His ribs were still visible. His paws would occasionally twitch as if he were dreaming of running from something, or perhaps toward it. I couldn't be sure. I offered him a bowl of warm water, holding it near his mouth, and for a moment there was no response. But then he sniffed, just slightly, and his tongue made a single, slow lap. A smile touched my lips. "That's it, kid. You keep that up, and we're going to be okay." He had no collar, no identification, no microchip, as the vet had confirmed. There was only an old, half-frayed blue ribbon tied around his neck, as if someone had once cared enough to claim him but then had utterly forgotten him. I stayed with him deep into the night, spoon-feeding him broth, warming him with a thick towel fresh from the dryer, and observing the firelight play across his face. At some point, long past midnight, I drifted off to sleep in the chair. I was woken by a soft, hoarse whine. His eyes were open, just a slit, but open nonetheless. He regarded me as if uncertain whether to trust what he was seeing, whether I was just another fleeting shadow in a world that had already cost him too much. I remained still and silent, simply letting him observe me. After a long moment, he blinked and let his head sink back onto the blanket. That was all I needed. He had seen me, and he hadn't recoiled. The following morning, he was still breathing. I hadn't slept well, maybe just a couple of hours in the armchair with my head against the window and a blanket over my shoulders, but I didn't mind. When I bent down and saw his chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm, something inside me broke open. It might have been relief or something more ancient that I hadn't experienced in a long time. He didn't raise his head when I wished him a good morning, but his eyes opened. He followed my movements. That was an improvement. I brought more broth, warm, and offered slowly. He took it in small licks from my fingers, his mouth quivering with each one, as if even that small motion was a great effort. But he was making that effort. I saw my reflection in the steaming cup, unshaven, weary, and older than I remembered. "It's just you and me for a while," I said quietly, more to him than to myself. He blinked once, slowly, not with fear this time, but with exhaustion. I sat on the floor beside him, my back to the couch. Through the window, the snow was mostly melted, revealing patches of muddy grass through the white. Spring always arrived late here in Northwood, but it was on its way. You could smell it. At some point, I slipped into a memory. Me, at age 10, in my childhood kitchen with a German Shepherd puppy on my lap. Her name was Bonnie. She had a penchant for chewing holes in my socks, and I was never angry with her. She passed away when I was 17. I never forgot the sound of her claws on the kitchen floor as she ran to the door whenever I returned home. I hadn't thought about her in years. I looked down at the small dog on the blanket and wondered about the memories he held, what he dreamt of when his paws twitched, and who he longed for. His legs suddenly kicked hard in his sleep, a sharp jerk as if from a nightmare. A low whimper followed, almost too faint to be heard. I shifted closer. "Hey, it's all right. You're safe now." He stirred, his eyes fluttering open again. This time, upon seeing me, he did more than just blink. He attempted to move. It was an awkward motion, just a slow raising of his head and a slight shift of one paw in my direction. But it was the first time he had initiated contact on his own. My chest felt tight. "You're a fighter," I whispered, "a stubborn little survivor." And for the first time, I understood that I wasn't merely looking after him. He was reawakening something within me that I hadn't known I had buried. That afternoon, the sky over Silver Pine grew soft and golden. I opened a window slightly to let in the breeze, and the scent of thawing ground and damp pine filled the house. Spring was cautiously returning to the world, slow and hesitant, as if trying to go unnoticed. He attempted to stand again. I was in the kitchen heating more broth when I heard a faint scratching sound on the wood floor. I turned to see him, his legs unsteady and his body trembling. But he was upright, just barely. His head was held low and his ears were askew. But he was on his feet. I stood still, just observing, my breath held in my throat. He took a single step, slipped a little, took another, and then collapsed, chest first, back onto the blanket. I dropped the spoon and hurried over, worried he might have injured himself. But his eyes were open and alert, his breathing rapid but not distressed. I knelt beside him and smiled. "You're a determined little pup, aren't you?" He didn't reply, naturally, but I could have sworn I saw a flicker in his gaze, as if he understood the tone rather than the words. I helped him back onto the blanket and gently stroked behind his ear. The fur there was coarse and still slightly matted, but it was warmer now, full of life. It was then that I had a realization. I needed to call him something other than Buddy. A name is important. It's the first element of an identity, the initial anchor to existence. I looked at him, at his deep brown eyes watching me. The name came to me without any forethought. "Rex," I said. He blinked once. There was no flinch, no fear, as if the word held no meaning for him yet. But perhaps, just perhaps, he was willing to learn what it could mean. "Rex," I repeated more softly. "That's who you are now." Later that evening, I opened the back door to let in some fresh air. Rex lifted his head from the blanket and gazed toward the light spilling through the screen. He didn't move, but he watched. He watched the trees, the birds, the way the wind made the curtains stir. He watched the world as if trying to recall what it was like to be part of it. That night, he crawled slowly, dragging one leg a bit, closer to where I was sitting on the floor with a book. He didn't make contact, just lay nearby, close enough for me to hear him breathe, close enough for me to feel it in my own chest. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel completely alone in that house. 2 days later, he followed me to the door. I hadn't anticipated it. I was putting on my boots to make a trip into town for supplies, and when I turned, he was there, standing just behind me, a little wobbly, his ears forward and his eyes attentive. He hadn't made a peep, just stood there as if he had been waiting for me to look back and see him. "You want to go outside?" His tail didn't wag, but his eyes didn't refuse. It was a cool spring afternoon, with the sun high above the trees, and patches of ice still lingered in the shaded parts of the yard. Rex stepped onto the porch as if it might bite him, moving slowly and carefully, testing each board beneath his paws. The wind rose, and I saw his nose twitch as he took in a dozen new scents at once. Sap, wet pine, mud, and smoke from a neighbor's chimney across the woods. He took another step, then 2 more, and then stopped, rigid. His head swiveled toward the lake, and something inside him shifted. The muscles in his body went taut, freezing him in place. His ears flattened, and his breathing became quick. Then the noise came, just a gentle splash as a duck landed on the water far out on the lake. But it was enough. Rex bolted, not forward, but backward, scrambling in a panic, his legs kicking against the wooden porch until he slipped and bumped into the door frame. He whimpered, his eyes wide, trying to push the door open with his head. I opened it for him. He darted inside, curled into a ball on his blanket by the fireplace, and would not look at me. I followed him in, knelt down, and gave him his space. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have realized. You're not ready." His entire body was shaking, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something older. I sat on the floor nearby and just waited. Minutes passed. Then I noticed it, a thin scar around his neck, almost concealed by his fur. It wasn't from a collar, but from something tighter and rougher, like a rope. Someone hadn't merely abandoned him. They had tied him, left him to drown. The realization struck me like a blow, and I hated the familiarity of the feeling, this helpless anger at something I could not change. He didn't need to use words to tell me what had happened. His body remembered the lake, the terror, the betrayal. And yet, he had still followed me to the door. He had still tried. I reached out slowly and rested my hand just behind his ear. He didn't flinch. That was progress. The next morning, I found him by the door again, not scratching or whining, but sitting quietly, watching. His stance was more stable this time, as if he wasn't asking for permission but instead testing me and testing the world. I opened the door slowly, and he remained still. "Just the porch," I said gently. "We'll do this one step at a time." He stepped outside without any reluctance. The sun was warmer today, drawing steam from the wet grass, and the air carried the scent of melting bark and thawed earth. Rex stood at the edge of the porch, taking it all in. He wasn't trembling or cowering, just observing. I walked down onto the path, and after a moment, I heard the soft padding of his paws behind me. We had gone halfway to the tree when he stopped. I turned and saw him looking back at the lake, silent and wary. I crouched down. That won't happen again. Not to you. He remained there, suspended between fear and trust. Then he took a single step forward, followed by another, and another, until he was right beside me. We didn't venture far, just to the edge of the forest. But it was a start. When we returned home, he ate more than he usually did, drank a lot of water from his bowl, and nudged it when it was empty, as if he understood he was allowed to ask for more now, as if the world had rules again. Later, as I sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee, he curled up beside me and rested his head on my boot. His eyes fluttered closed in the breeze. And for the first time since I had pulled him from the water, I heard it, a sigh, small and soft, like a burden he had been carrying had finally shifted just enough to let him breathe. That night, I carved his name into a piece of cedar and mounted it above the spot by the fireplace where he slept. It wasn't elaborate, just the word Rex. But it was something permanent, something that declared, you are not just passing through. The next morning, I called the local shelter, Eagle Ridge K9 Rescue Center, to report the puppy I had found, just as the vet had instructed. A woman with a kind, professional voice named Sarah answered. She asked for the basic information, age, breed, condition, and where I had found him. I provided the facts, but I didn't mention the way he looked at me when I said his name. I didn't tell her about the scar on his neck or his flinching at the sound of water. I didn't say how quiet the house had felt without his breathing. She offered to take him in, assist with placement and adoption, and mentioned they had an opening. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I looked down at Rex, who was curled up on the rug with a paw over his nose, and whispered to no one in particular, I don't know if I can let you go. A week later, I found myself back at the lake. It wasn't by chance. I had to know. I had replayed that morning in my mind too many times. His position in the water, the way he struggled, the direction he had come from. Something didn't feel right. Rex was sleeping peacefully by the fire when I left. I hated to leave him, even for just an hour, but something was nagging at the back of my thoughts, and I had to pursue it. The path along the far side of Silver Pine was soft with mud, and the cattails were still touched with frost. I walked the same area where I had first spotted him, examining the shoreline and treading carefully through the marsh. For some time, I found nothing but ice breaking in the current and the calls of early geese overhead. Then I saw it. Off the trail, partially submerged in the reeds, was the crumpled wreckage of a small aluminum boat. It was split nearly in two, rusted, and had burn marks in places. A rope was still hanging loosely from one end, its other end trailing into the water. And next to it, almost hidden in the mud, was a scrap of torn fabric, blue, the same color as the makeshift ribbon Rex had worn when I found him. I crouched down, my heart pounding. The rope wasn't tied as if for docking. It was looped, coarse, and frayed at the end, as if something or someone had been tethered there. He hadn't just fallen in. He hadn't gotten lost. He had been left to drown, tied to a sinking boat with just enough slack to fight for his life. That ribbon wasn't a mark of ownership. It was a placeholder for someone who had no intention of returning. I remained there for a long time, staring at that boat, my hands clenched so tightly that my fingers grew numb. I had encountered many bad things in my life, accidents, neglect, but this was different. Someone had made a deliberate choice. It was cold and final, and yet he had still fought his way to the shore. I didn't contact the sheriff. I didn't take any photos. What would I have said? That I had a bad feeling and a half-dead puppy who had survived something truly evil? No, I wasn't seeking justice. I was focused on healing. When I returned home, Rex greeted me at the door. He was still limping slightly, but he was stronger. He sniffed my boots, paused at the lake mud caked on the soles, and then looked up at me. He knew, not precisely what I had seen, but he sensed enough to feel it. Something unspoken passed between us then, something quiet and ancient. I know what they did, I said softly, but that is no longer your story. He followed me back inside without a sound, curled up by the fire, and laid his head on my foot. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, listening to the wind creaking through the trees, the house settling around me as it always did. But now there was a new rhythm I hadn't noticed before. The soft breathing from the living room. The steady presence of a puppy who should not have survived. I rose around 3 a.m. and found him curled tightly on the rug, his chest rising and falling in the embers' glow. I sat on the couch and simply watched him, this little German Shepherd puppy who had transformed the feeling of silence in this house. None of this had been planned. I wasn't searching for a dog. After losing Mabel, my last shepherd, I had sworn I would never get another. She had been with me through the most difficult period of my life, and when she passed, it felt like closing a door that needed to remain shut. No more paw prints. No more farewells. But now this puppy had walked right into the space I had sealed off. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. "I don't know what this is supposed to be, Rex," I said quietly. "But you're making it very hard to pretend I don't care." His ears twitched, but he remained still. The following day, we tried the trail again, taking a different route that wound behind the cabin, away from the lake. Rex was wary but intrigued. He sniffed every branch and stump, observed birds with a tilted head and a raised paw, as if he was remembering how the world functioned. He even chased a falling pine cone once, then looked back at me as if unsure whether that was permissible. I laughed for the first time in a while. The sound echoed through the trees and startled a squirrel, which caused him to perk up with the closest thing to a tail wag I had yet seen. For a brief, fleeting moment, he resembled a normal puppy, not a survivor, not a victim, just a dog in the woods rediscovering how to be one. But the tranquility was short-lived. As we came around a bend, a car door slammed in the distance, someone unseen down by the road. The sound was sharp and metallic, jarring in the quiet surroundings. Rex dropped to the ground, his body stiff, ears back, and tail tucked underneath him. His breathing became shallow and rapid. He stared in the direction of the noise as if it had physical claws. I knelt beside him. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe. No one is coming for you." He didn't move. It took a full 5 minutes before he would stand again. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't have to. Whoever had done this to him, whatever they had used to instill this level of fear, had marked him more deeply than any scar could. But he had followed me here, trusted me, and now it was my responsibility to show him that not all sounds lead to pain, that some doors open to warmth, and that some people stay. The storm arrived quickly, one of those abrupt Minnesota spring tempests. The wind grew violent in seconds, making the trees groan, and rain pounded on the roof as if trying to break through. The power flickered once, but stayed on. I moved through the house, checking the windows, but my thoughts were with him. Rex had never been fond of storms. I had learned that fast. The first time thunder had rumbled, he had crawled under the table and stayed there for hours. But this storm felt different, worse. There was something in the air. It wasn't just the weather, it was a memory. I found him pacing by the back door, his head low, ears back, and tail tucked in tight. "It's okay," I said, coming up to him slowly. "It's just wind and noise." He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the trees outside, which were swaying like giants about to topple. Another clap of thunder cracked over the lake, and he flinched severely, scrambling toward the hallway, toward the spot behind the washing machine where he had hidden during his first week here. But as he rounded the corner, a loud snap came from outside. The sound of wood breaking. I recognized that sound, a falling tree. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and jacket and rushed onto the back deck. The old pine tree by the shed, which had been half dead for years, was gone. It had snapped at its base and collapsed down the slope behind the house, landing on the trail, the very one Rex and I had walked every morning for a week. I moved quickly, checking for damage, for limbs on the roof, or anything that needed immediate attention. That's when I heard it, a bark. It was short, desperate, and distant. "Rex." I turned back to the house, but he wasn't at the door. Another bark came, farther away now, in the direction of the trees. He was outside. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a leash and a coat, leaving the door swinging open behind me. Rain drenched my face in an instant. I followed the barking, pushing through the underbrush, my flashlight beam jumping with each step. And then I found him at the base of the fallen tree, pawing at the branches, digging, and barking with desperation. I aimed the light where he was looking and froze. A small raccoon, barely alive, was trapped under the limbs, its eyes blinking slowly. It was half crushed but still breathing. Rex looked up at me with something raw in his eyes. Not panic or confusion, but purpose. He hadn't run in fear. He had gone back for something weaker than himself. I didn't know how he had found it or why he felt it was important, but he had, and he refused to leave it. I stood there in the storm, the flashlight trembling in my hand, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, something almost sacred in its stillness. This puppy, this broken, beaten, terrified little soul, had just done what most people would not. He saw pain and chose not to turn away. I knelt beside him, soaked through, and whispered, "You are not who they try to make you. You are so much more." And in that instant, I was no longer the one who had rescued him. He was rescuing me. By the next morning, the storm had moved on, leaving the world wet and silent. The sky was a pale, scrubbed clean blue, as if everything had been washed and renewed. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching Rex stretch in a sliver of sunlight on the deck. His coat was still damp in places, but his eyes were luminous, more so than I had ever seen them. The raccoon did not survive the night. I had done what I could, providing blankets, warmth, and quiet, but some injuries are beyond repair. Rex had sat beside the crate the entire time, watchful but calm, as if holding a vigil. Not a single sound came from him, only his presence. That was the kind of dog he was. That morning, I understood the truth. He wasn't meant for me alone. He was meant for something larger, for healing, for trust, for the unseen work that most people never notice. I made the call. Sarah from the Eagle Ridge K9 Rescue Center answered again. She seemed surprised to hear from me, as if she had assumed I had changed my mind, which I nearly had. But I told her the truth. Rex was ready, and perhaps I was as well. We set a time for her to visit. I spent that day with him as if it were our last. We walked the trail he used to fear, but this time, he didn't flinch as we passed the lake. He paused, looked out at the calm water, and then continued on. He met my gaze now, held it for longer, and trusted it. He came when I called his name. He rested his head on my knee without being prompted. He sat beside me as I whittled by the fire, as if he had always been a part of this house. But he had more to offer than I could provide for him alone. He needed a child to follow to bed, a family to protect, a world to help him forget the one he came from. When Sarah arrived the next day, Rex did not hide. He walked toward her slowly, allowed her to kneel, sniffed her outstretched hand, and then did something I hadn't expected. He turned back to me and sat down right at my feet, as if to ask, "Are you certain?" I knelt and placed a hand on his chest. "You've got this," I whispered. "You were made to help someone. You just had to survive first." His eyes never left mine, not even as she attached the leash and opened the car door. He jumped inside but kept his head turned toward me until they vanished down the dirt road. And then he was gone. The house was quiet again, but it was not empty. His blanket remained by the fire. His name was still etched into the cedar plank. His spirit lingered in the corners of the rooms, in the sound of my own footsteps, and in the echo of that final look. In the space he left, something new began to grow. It wasn't silence. It was hope. This small dog's journey from being abandoned to being rehabilitated highlights the crucial role that nonprofit rescue organizations play. When I first pulled that German Shepherd puppy from the lake, I believed I was saving his life. But somewhere along the way, through the sleepless nights, the quiet walks, and the gradual mending of broken pieces, I came to realize that he was also saving mine. Rex didn't enter my world by coincidence. He arrived precisely when he was supposed to, not to remain, but to remind me that even the most wounded spirits can still possess light. He taught me that healing isn't always a loud process. It happens in quiet moments, small triumphs, and the earning of trust, one breath at a time. I still find myself glancing toward the fireplace in the evenings, half expecting to see him there. I still imagine the sound of phantom paws on the wood floor and fine tufts of black and tan fur caught in my flannel blanket. When I walk the path behind my house, I sometimes picture him just ahead, his tail wagging and his ears alert, leading the way. Rex didn't require much, just warmth, safety, and a reason to continue fighting. And once he was ready, once that puppy was whole again, he moved on to help someone else heal. Caring for a rescued puppy is about more than just love. It's a responsibility. It's providing diligent care. It's offering a second chance, not only to them, but also to ourselves.